Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for OnSI every single day since August 2019. And we are here moving forward through yet another offseason together. As always, you can always find our 100% free 24/7 boots on the ground content when you follow us on social media such as Facebook or Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. Okay, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Today, we are going to give our review of Friday night's scrimmage inside Everbank Stadium. It was a mock game for the Jaguars. They did just really one series of the starting offense versus starting defense. So just one series of ones versus ones. So you saw a lot of the starting offense versus the number 2 defense, number 2 offense versus the number 1 defense, and then the number 3 units against each other. To me, the big takeaway has to be that Trevor Lawrence looked fantastic. Now, there were a couple of misses. He should have had a touchdown to Travis Hunter on the first drive when they kind of bogged down the red zone. He didn't put it enough in front of Travis. Ventrell Miller was able to knock it away. And then he had a second throw, to Parker Washington in the corner of the end zone. Zach McPherson, who has honestly made some plays in training camp as kind of a veteran who has hung around for the last few years. He really has stepped up and, made the most of his opportunities. He was able to intercept Trevor in the end zone, have a big return. Liam Cohen said after the fact that, there are a couple of factors into that. One was Parker Washington's route and the fact that the corner just fell off from, the shallower route in the combination and read the play well. And then two, he says just one of those plays that Trevor just, if you see that happen in the progression, if you see that defender drop, just move on. Just get away from it. So it was clearly a learning moment for Trevor Lawrence. But besides those two throws, folks, it is hard for me to think of many plays where Trevor Lawrence was just downright missing. I mean, they started off the scrimmage with, big gains to De'Ami Brown and Brendan Strange. On his third throw, he should have had a touchdown to Brian Thomas Jr. DeAndre Prince broke it up, but it was a perfectly placed ball and kind of a fade type route, and Brian Thomas Jr. just didn't come down with it. But they responded past that. After having to settle for a field goal on that first red zone drive, Lawrence led 3 other touchdowns in the red zone, threw 2 touchdowns to Brian Thomas Jr., including one really impressive tight window throw. Also completed a touchdown pass to Brendan Strange on the last play of the scrimmage, though he might have been sacked on that play if it was, an actual game, but it was still an impressive throw to the ascending tight end in the end zone. Trevor, to me, he made some layered throws as well. He made 2 throws to opposite sides of the sidelines to Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter that I thought were just, S-tier throws. The special throws that you want to see if you're the Jaguars from Trevor Lawrence. To me, the ball is just leaving his hand a little bit differently. He looks more accurate, more controlled. It looks like he's putting a little more zip on the ball. I don't know if that's just me seeing things. I don't know if that's due to the change in mechanics, but I'd say right now, just in terms of purely throwing the ball, I'm not sure Trevor Lawrence has looked better with the Jaguars. And I say that as somebody who has seen him since his first training camp with the Jaguars. Trevor hasn't always been like a practice player either. I'd say more often than not, he's kind of been an up and down practice player, more of a gamer than anything else. And that his stadium and scrimmage performances and training camp performances aren't always, I'd say, overly impressive, or at least, what the situation is. I thought Trevor was that impressive on Friday night. I thought it was a fantastic performance by him in terms of executing and hitting the throws that were there. Seems like he's making his decisions a little bit faster. And Liam Cohen said as much after the practice that, he thought Trevor was quote-unquote awesome. He seemed really happy with where his quarterback was. And the one thing I can appreciate about Liam Cohen, guys don't have to maybe guess where they stand. He's been very clear and direct in a lot of his communication, a lot of his, press conference comments. So to me, if Trevor Lawrence ever struggles, I think Liam Cohen will be the first one to say so. But Cohen seemed very happy with the progress of Trevor Lawrence. To Cohen's credit, I think that you saw a lot of how the scheme is going to help Trevor. There was a healthy dose of screens, but the scheme, more importantly to me, guys were getting open. There were windows presented to Trevor Lawrence and answers provided to him that, he wasn't having to hold on to the ball and try to fit it into some tight impossible window. Liam Cohen, one of the best scheme guys in the NFL, one of the best offensive play callers in the NFL. It looked like he's going to have no troubles getting guys open. Now, as for, the other big attraction of Jaguars training camp, Travis Hunter, it was definitely interesting. Seeing him, practice two different positions in one scrimmage. He started the day out with the offense, which I'd say probably should have been expected. He was, I believe, on defense, the last time that the Jaguars practiced. So he started the day on offense. He was on the field for the first 3 drives of the starting offense. So really the bulk, of the drives. I think he missed a couple plays on the last one because that's when he kind of tapped out to go get ready for defense while they were in the red zone and Parker Washington came in. But overall, I thought he was impressive. He should have had 4 catches and a touchdown if it weren't for the aforementioned Trevor Lawrence miss with Ventrell Miller in coverage. But, beside that, I thought, Travis Hunter had a really positive night on offense. You could see the ability in space, the explosiveness, electricity of the ball in his hands. He's going to be a special player after the catch on screens, things like that. You can just see that already in small, controlled settings like this one. To me, he made, I wouldn't say one of his more impressive catches, but one of the more impressive connections that he's had with Trevor Lawrence so far is just, downright impressive play. Catching a ball on the left sideline that Lawrence just fit above the sitting cornerback in zone coverage. Hunter was able to elevate and come down with the pass. And then when he went to go play defense, he trotted across the field, went to the other side of the field for the defense, changed out his jersey and shoulder pads, etc. He got more run with the starting defense during the scrimmage than I've seen him get at any other day in camp. He was pretty extensively with the starting defense. They've had him with the backup defense a lot during training camp, but this wasn't the case on Friday. He ran with the starters a lot. He didn't really get the ball thrown his way. I'm not sure if he was targeted once in coverage. Nick Mullins and John Wolford were hitting a lot of checkdowns. You could tell that the defensive line was getting pressure against the backup offensive line, obviously. So there were, a lot of checkdowns, not a lot of stuff going Travis Hunter's way. But with that said, I do think it was a solid night for Travis Hunter. Now, in terms of where, some things that they need to improve, I thought that overall, there were too many penalties, whether that's holdings. There were far too many false start penalties. There were, I think, 5 or 6. So they need to clean up their operation a little bit, their procedures. That, to me, was probably the biggest glaring negative is just far too many penalties. And, they tried to treat this like a mock game. They had the referees out there announcing the penalties, etc. And it wasn't just the backups either. It was some of the starting unit as well, especially along the offensive line. I thought in terms of the offensive line, Liam Cohen made a good point. Cole Van Lanen's injured right now, so they need to figure out who exactly is their swing tackle. So Anton Harrison played left tackle for a drive, while Fred Johnson played right tackle. I don't think that's them saying, okay, Anton's now competing for left tackle. I think they're just trying to see what they have there in terms of, what are their options just in case for any injuries moving forward. And then I guess I'd say, lastly, the thing that kind of stood out maybe as not ultra positive, the backup quarterbacks had a tough night. And obviously you expect that. You expect there to be a massive drop-off after Trevor Lawrence. And there is a massive drop-off after Trevor Lawrence. But I had thought Nick Mullins had been having a really solid training camp. Friday was probably his worst practice, I think. He was intercepted by Jordan Lewis early on in the practice. Lewis made a great diving interception of him. Jarian Jones had several pass breakups. John Wolford, was really struggling with the pocket movement, was struggling with the accuracy, and they just didn't get many passes downfield for those second and third team units. But I will say the first team offense was much more explosive than they had been during training camp. It seemed like that was the one thing that really stuck out to Liam Cohen as well. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. Thank you as always for joining, and of course, We'll see you next time.